Hi, Kim. Welcome to my channel, Journey and Beyond Untold Stories. How are you and how's it going? How's
Yeah,
life?
yeah. Hi, Shafali. Thanks for having me on. I'm good. Life's good. Life's good. It's a beautiful sunny day here in Sydney. We've got a lot to talk about what my team at Resonate's been up to.
I know, right? I have a lot to talk about. But before we talk about Resonate, I want to start with your journey from when you were at UN and then you were at Oxford. How did you get your first opportunity at the UN? It's a big deal, right?
Yeah, totally.
What did it teach you about the leadership and global challenges?
Yeah, so it's funny. My career has kind of taken a few unexpected turns. I've followed a few opportunities that I never would have seen coming, and my move to the UN was one of those. So I was planning to go and do a PhD after I finished my kind of undergrad. Basically, it came about because there was a gap between the time that uni's finished in Australia and uni's started up overseas, and I had 6 months to kill. And I thought, oh, what can I do? And somehow landed upon a volunteer gig with the World Food Program. So I started out as a volunteer working in their office in Bangkok doing software development. So I was hired as a software developer to essentially, there was a project where they were simulating emergencies. So the World Food Program is the UN's sort of lead agency for emergency logistics for humanitarian agencies. And so it's really crucial for them to understand these emergencies, how they're going to respond. And part of that is computer simulations. But essentially that was like my pathway into the emergency team. And after 6 months, rapidly moved out of software development just into, I guess the emergency team is the kind of place where they just grab people when people are needed. I sort of moved from what was a very technical position into emergency management roles and emergency operations. So that 6 month gap turned into 5 years all of a sudden. And then eventually I said, hang on, I actually do really want to go do a PhD. So I did go and pursue that.
Nice.
Yeah.
And then you ended up landing at Oxford. Wow. Such an overachiever. So, talk about what inspired your shift from World Food Program at the UN to neuroscience and brain mapping at Oxford, because it's two different worlds, right?
Totally. Yeah. And like I say, with my career, there isn't a single cohesive thread. I've just been lucky with having these incredible opportunities. And as an undergrad, I was really passionate about neuroscience and just fascinated by trying to understand the brain and how it worked, what's going on up there effectively. And so that was always a real sort of interest point of mine. Now I was drawn, again, it's just the opportunity. It's being able to go to Oxford and study with really the world's leading thinkers, leading scientists on understanding how our brains are actually computing information, how we're managing to do all of the things that we do. It was something that I definitely couldn't pass up. And yeah, it was quite the shift. I guess the UN work is very challenging, but in very different ways. It isn't so, there's an enormous amount of work to do. It's not particularly intellectual work. And so I guess I was drawn back into something there where I had to really stop and think about a problem in depth and analyze things with the length of time that you just don't have the luxury of in emergency operations. So it really was kind of polar opposites in that sense.
That's amazing and that's so inspiring, Cam. Want to understand, you have lived in so many countries. Say you have lived in US and then you moved to UK. You have lived in Bangkok as well before that, and then you moved to Australia. What major challenges did you face working in diverse environments, and how did you adapt to the change?
So being on the emergency team, there were even a lot of places where I was stationed, but so I lived in Italy for 3 years, but I was traveling 75% of the time. And so it didn't actually feel like I was living in Italy because it was sort of, 1 week a month that I'd be back there trying to sort my life out and then off to another country. So I'd say that was definitely quite challenging. It was also super exciting, and I was in my early 20s at the time. I think I'd find that even more challenging these days to try to keep up with it. I think
We're
going from
getting
place.
old.
What's that? I'm getting old, yeah.
We're getting old.
But in terms of the challenges, I think probably the hardest thing, communication between people of different cultures. There's so much that, trying to manage a large scale operation, it all comes down to people, right? And a huge, probably the biggest element of management in my mind is how you really understand the people that you're working with, what drives them, what motivates them. And that's incredibly challenging when you don't really understand the culture. You don't know the hidden cues. There's a lot that's left unsaid. And so that's probably the hardest thing, that a lot of the time you are flying blind in so many respects and having to still make decisions without really having the confidence behind you that you've fully grasped what is going on underneath the surface. So that's incredibly challenging.
Yeah. So how many languages do you speak? You speak English only?
Well, I could say maybe 1 and 2 halves. I was at one stage I was fluent in Spanish, and then I moved to Italy, and I learned Italian just by mostly speaking Spanish and substituting out word for word over time, which is actually, now if I try to speak Spanish, it's just this horrible mix of Italian and Spanish words.
Right. So, Kim, you are such an overachiever, right? I mean, I can't stop myself saying that.
Oh,
You're someone who has worked at the UN, Oxford, all the big tags. What made you start your own company? Because it's a hard journey. And how did your experience at the UN and Oxford shaped, your journey with your new venture?
Yeah, that's a good question. Why did I start Resonate? Ultimately, I'm somebody that's always been, I guess, driven by impact and wanting to see what I'm doing, how that actually translates to people in the real world. Definitely, my first real job was at the UN, which is somewhere where your sort of benchmark for impact is really quite high. The work that you do, the World Food Programme feeds 100 million people each year. So you know when you can see the impact that your work is having. It's very, very clear and obvious. With going into academia, I was still motivated by impact. I guess, so I was in academia for 8 years, and I guess there was a sense at the end. It took me quite some time to get up to speed with neuroscience and where the current standard of science was. And then there was this sense that, wow, we're coming up with, there's a lot that we've actually learned about the brain, but it isn't being used for anything. It's sort of this very niche group of experts around the world who all mutually understand what each other are talking about, but that hasn't been translated out to anything practical and useful. There are several ways in which neuroscience has been used, but it's still quite shocking when you look at modern psychiatry and just how little move between neuroscience and clinical practice, how slow that translation is. So ultimately that was what motivated me to set up Resonate, was because I thought there's got to be an opportunity here for this to actually, the things that we know about how brain health links to mental health, to actually deploy that into practice in the midst of a mental health crisis. I started my business at the end of COVID as well, which was when the mental health system has been struggling for a while. It was really, really struggling then.
So you were talking about Resonate and mental health. What gaps in the mental health treatment is Resonate addressing?
Yeah, so Resonate's vision is to accelerate recovery from depression. That's why we exist, because the real problem that we see, you're not going to be able to solve the depression crisis, but the problem is that the system's just not treating people fast enough. So you see people on waiting lists It's currently about a 6-month wait to see a psychiatrist in Australia, or about a 3-month wait to see a psychologist. And then people get onto treatments that, if it's antidepressant medication, they might be weaned on over a period of 6 weeks to 3 months. It's months before they might see any improvement. And then they're weaned off over months later if that hasn't happened and it's time to try something else. So that's really where we see the opportunity, is in shortening that pathway so that people can get onto something quickly that starts working for them.
Yep, it's amazing. How did it, like, you don't have a customer yet, right? You're rolling the clinical trial and you're in the process of TGA approval. Is that correct?
That's right.
So how your business model will work? Will you tie it up with clinicians, pathologists, or
Exactly. Our plan is to go through clinics. So we will be providing a platform that clinics can sign onto, that they can then sign their clients onto. So how that would work in practice, when I was just talking about trying to accelerate that pathway, when people call up and they're placed on a wait list for 3 months, that's when they can be offered, instead of just waiting for 3 months to see what happens, they can be offered to go straight onto this platform and start using the tech to get them started on that pathway whilst they're waiting to see a psychologist, and then they continue that through that course there.
Yeah, right. Okay. Amazing. So with AI evolving rapidly, what are your thoughts on its role in mental health space?
Oh, it's so interesting.
Yeah, I know, right?
One of those things, who knows really, but one of the things that I find fascinating, like I've already been proven wrong on, I thought initially everybody was talking about AI chatbots, and I kind of said, nah, people go to see a therapist for a human connection. And that's still true. It doesn't mean that people don't want to talk to chatbots. They just talk to them it's like a completely different form of therapy, where people, instead of slowly building trust and then exposing their issues over the course of weeks or even months, with chatbots, they tend to just go straight in and they just tell all their deepest, darkest secrets straight up. So it's interesting that the human interaction with AI is in fact quite different to that human-human interaction.